Well, it is time to do the annual tradition of doing the prediction of both the Eastern Conference and Western Conference table. Well, actually, for today, I'll only be doing the prediction of the Eastern Conference table, while tomorrow I will be doing the prediction of the Western Conference table. But there's no doubt that this video is going to be controversial, and that I have a feeling some people is going to be offended of me putting their team maybe too low in the table, and I'm probably going to get some hated comments in the comment section. But this is also a video where I can't wait an 8-month time when the season ends and I do a reaction video of the prediction I made in the beginning of the season, that I won't be surprised there's going to be a couple of teams that I either rated them very low and put them too low on the table and they end up making the playoffs, or teams that I put too high in the table and that they look like they will be a contender, and then at the end of the season they look like one of the worst team in the league. But that's what prediction is for. You just don't know how things are going to turn out, and especially this season with how the COVID pandemic is still kind of a thing, and with the way that the season is kind of very congested, and that a lot of teams are playing against their regional opponent 2 or even 3 times, and pretty much playing their interconference opponents at least 2 times this season. It is going to be very unpredictable of how exactly each team is going to finish. But I'm going to try my best in terms of making my prediction in looking at the Eastern Conference. So let's start with the team that I think is going to unfortunately finish last in the Eastern Conference table, and that team is Montreal. And I think if you're a Cincinnati fan, you can basically breathe a sigh of relief, because I am actually for once not predicting you to finish last. I know there are some people that I've already seen make their prediction of the Eastern Conference table for this upcoming season, and I still see some people putting FC Cincinnati as dead last. And I'll get to talking about where I put FC Cincinnati on this table, of explaining why exactly they're probably not gonna finish last, but you probably know what the explanation is. But for Montreal, I put them in last place because I really feel like this is a rebuilding year for this team, and that there's also so much unknown with this team, despite the fact that they made a lot of signings this offseason to theoretically improve the team. But when I just look at a lot of these signings, they're mostly kind of reclamation project, or just players that is kind of maybe used as a placeholder in terms of this deep rebuild that they might be started to embark on. Now, that being said, if all these placeholder and all these reclamation project turns out to be good, then this team can definitely easily maybe finish well above the place that I put them here, and they might be also one of the team that I could look back in 8 months time when they do make the playoffs, that how silly I did to predict Montreal to finish last. But the only way that would happen is that if all these signings that they made is going to be a hit, and it's not very often you see teams where when they made a lot of signing in the offseason, that every signing of course turns out to be a hit, especially when you look at some of these signings that Montreal has, where a lot of these guys, they come from leagues that is kind of not in MLS, and that they're kind of like unproven MLS player, and you just don't know whether or not if they're going to work out and gel together to be a team that is going to be competitive this season. But now moving on into number 13. And for 13th place, I'm going to say it's going to be DC United. Now, I'm going to say the same reason for DC as I said with Montreal, where there's so much unpredictability with this DC United team. And it's not just the fact that like Montreal, where I also forgot to mention that they have a new head coach in Wilfred Nancy, and it will be very interesting to see how he's going to do in his first season, knowing that this is his first ever season as a head coach in his coaching career. But for DC United, they also have a young head coach in Hernan Losada, and that we don't know what exactly he's going to do and what tactics he's going to use for this DC team that could potentially make themselves of being a playoff team. But when you also look at the roster, there's no doubt now a lot of question on the attacking end, and that there's question whether or not if these DP attacker is actually going to do well. So guys like Edison Flores, you don't know whether or not if he is going to get in form. Guys like Emil Assad that had a really down year, and then of course one of the most important attacking player, and actually, he's not one of the most important, but the most important attacking player, in my opinion, of this DC team. Paul Arriola, he's going to be out for this team, at least for the first couple of weeks. But when he does come back, can he reignite this team and get things going on the attack, and also hopefully stay off the IR table, because he seems to be kind of injury prone for these past couple of seasons. And then, of course, there's the big question of the number 9 position, where I'm assuming Ola Kamara is still going to be the guy that's going to be the number 9 on opening day. But that being said, if he's going to have another down year, and knowing the fact that it seemed like maybe age has started to catch up to Ola Kamara, since he's now into his late 30s, are we going to see a kind of another revolving door going on in that number 9 position? Because when you look at that number 9 position, there's definitely some depth in terms of that part of the field, but a lot of those depth pieces are not really guys that you think are starting quality player and starting quality of a number 9 that's going to score goals for the team. So there's a lot of question in terms of whether or not if this attack can get going. If they can definitely get going, then no doubt I think this team won't finish where I predict, and they'll probably finish higher. But if they're going to stall out like they did last season, yeah, they're going to once again be a team that's going to be finished near the bottom of the Eastern Conference table. But moving on to 12th place, and hey, look, this is where I put FC Cincinnati in the table. And I think if there's any team that I put them even this low in the table, and not just the Eastern Conference prediction, but also when I do my Western Conference prediction tomorrow, I think FC Cincinnati fans are going to be the happiest, because they're not going to be finishing last this season. I mean, I said it yesterday in the expectation index, where I think the goal of this season is to not finish last. I mean, this team, even though they of course got those big attacking musician in Brenier and Lucho Acosta, I'm pretty sure this team is still a way off of potentially competing for the playoffs. But that's not what their goal this season. Their goal this season is that hopefully those big attacking acquisition that they made this offseason is going to fix their attacking woe, and at least be a respectable team, and not be a punching bag and a punching line of a team as they have been for the past couple or for their past 2 seasons. So yeah, I believe FC Cincinnati is not going to finish last. I think this team is probably the best squad that FC Cincinnati has compared into their first 2 seasons, and I trust the fact that eventually they are going to be respectful, and Yapstam will continue to improve on this team, where last season, even though they finished last, I thought that FC Cincinnati team definitely showed some improvement compared to last season, because their defense definitely were much better compared to what they were in their inaugural season. And the only reason why they still finished dead last in the table is that they just could not score the goals to be able to win games. Now, in 11th place, I am going to say Inter Miami. So when you look at this Miami team, and look at their roster, you would think this roster should be a playoff team. I mean, they have a lot of big name players like Gonzalo Higuain, Blaise Matuidi, and Rodolfo Pizarro. And when you think about it, this should at least be a playoff team, or maybe even an MLS Cup contender. The reason why I don't think that is the case is look what happened last year, when all those big name players that they signed, and even some of their young DP players like Pellegrini and Carenza, with one of them, there is now question whether or not if he's actually even going to be part of this team. And I have heard rumors that Pellegrini could potentially be going to Montreal this off season. There definitely is a lot of question whether or not if those attacking players can actually show the potential, because there's no doubt that I think pretty much almost everyone on that Inter Miami team last season kind of underachieved, and a lot of the reason why they kind of didn't do well is because they had no identity whatsoever. Like a lot of these players were kind of playing out of their position, and kind of had no sense of flow into this team. And coming into this season, I know I said this before, but I'm gonna say it again. I just don't believe Phil Neville is gonna be the guy that fixed this issue. I mean, a guy that he's coming in to this team kind of as a first year head coach in the club level, and knowing the history that I've heard, he is not a coach that, even though he did do some good success with the England women's national team and getting that team to the semifinal in the World Cup. If you dig a little deeper, his tactics were kind of a little bit inept, and the only reason why that team was able to get very far was because the talent kind of overrides in terms of some of the tactical ineptitude that he showed in this team. And if he's going to kind of show that same technical ineptitude coming into this Inter Miami team, yeah, this is going to end disaster, isn't it? And not to mention, when I also look at some of their other signings, I mean, they did make some decent signing and bring Gregor in the midfield, but in the defense, they decided to go with a couple of retrend in the Premier League in Ryan Shawcross and Kieran Gibbs. Yeah, that's probably not the signings that you would think that it should be an improvement to the first season, and those are probably not the signings where, if those guys are going to be starters in that back line, this Miami team is going to lead goals with the way that both of those players are clearly nowhere near the quality that I think is going to be an MLS starting quality kind of defense. But now moving on into 10th place. And I'm going to say it's going to be the Red Bulls. Now, I know last year I said that the Red Bulls were due for a regression because they kind of go through a transitional year, and that maybe this is finally the year where they're going to unfortunately have their playoff streak ended. And it turns out that, of course, wasn't the case, and they end up making the playoffs. Now, you would think, why would I actually think the same way this season, and why do I think that I basically kind of learn nothing from what I said about last year, where I think this team is definitely due for a regression, and that this might be the final year, or this might be the year where they finally miss the playoffs? Well, once again, they're going through a transitional period, and also they have a new head coach heading into this season, where, for Gerhard Struber, unlike a couple of these new head coaches, I kind of at least have some ideas of what he's going to do, where he's going to try to make this Red Bulls team kind of like that Jesse Morris and Chris Armas kind of team, which is a pressing kind of Red Bulls team. But the big question is that if he decides to implement that tactics, do he have the players to do so? Because when you look at this squad that the Red Bulls has, it's a mix of veterans player with a couple of young kids, either coming from the Red Bulls Academy or coming from the English Championship level, and none of them have really shown progress of being a decent kind of player for this team. So yeah, I just wonder, even if the Red Bulls are looking to try to go back to their identity, which is being a team that likes to press, do they have the talent to able to do so? And judging by the fact that I put them in 10th place, the answer is probably no. And that I also feel like over the years, it seemed like teams are starting to figure out how to play against this Red Bulls press. And unless if Gerhard Struber is going to use a very unique kind of press that teams probably have not seen the Red Bulls done in previous year, I don't think teams are going to have much trouble to deal with this Red Bulls press as we see in the past, when this team was very successful using this press tactics that they of course use. Now in 9th place, I am going to say Nashville SC, and we're getting to a territory where this is kind of right around the spot where I think these team could really be on the bubble of potentially be a fringe playoff team, and Nashville SC, of course, is one of them. Now, for Nashville, I really think this could be a step back this season, and this is not to disrespect the fact that last season was not an incredible year, and that to disrespect them thinking that last year was just a fluke. The thing that I feel like Nashville could take a step back is mainly to the fact that I feel like they're not going to sneak up on team anymore. Like, I think every team has figured out what Nashville is going to do, which is they're going to try to bunker and trying to suffocate you on the defensive end while trying to rely on set piece and trying to counterattack on you. Well, there's a very simple way to basically figure out that kind of tactics, and that is just let them have all the ball and let them to see if they can, of course, break you down. And knowing the fact that Nashville last season have shown that when they do have the ball, they have a lot of trouble in terms of breaking teams down, this is going to be something that they need to figure out. And if Gary Smith team is not going to figure out this and not have a different plan to not just bunker all the time and trying to always rely on counterattack and set piece goal opportunity, yeah, this could be kind of like a team what we saw with FC Cincinnati in their inaugural season. But that being said, I don't think it's going to be even as bad as FC Cincinnati, because I feel like this Nashville defense is definitely not a fluke. Although it will be very interesting to see how they're going to do throughout the full 34 game season, and especially now that they're going to play against every single Eastern Conference opponent at least twice. Which last season, I think one of the things that people also said why Nashville kind of did better than expected is that they had a relatively easy schedule. Now I know that Nashville fans, and certainly Nashville will want to prove people that of course is not the case, and the way to do it is to be able to once again show their defensive strength throughout the full 34 games. But we've seen before where it is definitely much tougher to trying to be such a good defensive team as what we saw from Nashville throughout the full 34 games, compared to a very stop and go 23 game season that we have last year. But if their defense is able to hold up, and if they can still able to just find enough goal score or opportunity, and some of those players on the attacking end can find their goal scoring form, then yeah, I think Nashville can definitely be a team that could be a fringe playoff team again. But if not, they definitely will take a step back and finish ninth in the table. Now in 8th place, another team that I mentioned could definitely make the playoffs, but I'm going to put them just outside of the playoff table right now, and that of course is the Chicago Fire. So for the Fire, I said it before, where this team, they definitely have the talent to potentially be a playoff team, but the only thing that held them back is consistency. If this Fire team is able to be consistent, then there's no doubt that I think they're going to finish in the playoffs. But if they are not consistent, and they're going to show that inconsistent form that they have been in the past couple of years, then they're going to finish right around where they kind of was last year, which was just missing out on the playoffs by one spot. So yeah, it'll be very interesting to see whether or not if Rafael Wikisai can do so, and whether or not if this attack, which I thought last year this Fire team on the attack, they were definitely a very dangerous attack, and also kind of one of the funnest team to watch with the way that they kind of build up play and also go on the attack. But the question now is that if they can sustain that throughout pretty much every single game, and not just have like one game where their attack looked really decent, and then the very next one it just pretty much disappeared, and it was not a non-factor whatsoever. Now in 7th place, a team that just finished above the red line, and actually I'm going to change markers because we're getting to the point where these teams of course will make the playoffs, which is going to be ones I use with the blue marker, and that of course is NYCFC. So I originally was thinking about putting NYCFC here, because I was thinking that when you look at this team of how much they do not have any attacking power, and knowing the fact that I feel like this NYCFC team could be something similar to what we saw last season, where in the beginning of the year they really struggled to score goals because they don't really have a lot of attacking talent. I feel like we're going to see something similar to that with NYCFC. Now, the only reason why I still put them above the red line is that I do trust that this City Football Group is eventually going to address that issue, and they technically kind of did that when a couple of days ago they did sign a Brazilian forward that I of course will talk about who he is in the news of the week episode, but he could be a guy that can definitely add in some depth in a much needed attack that really needs some depth. But I do trust the fact that City Football Group is eventually going to go into the summer transfer window and able to get guys that there to be able to fix the attacking woes that they might be incurring for this upcoming season. And speaking of the transfer window, and specifically the summer transfer window, that's another thing what can plays out in terms of me doing these prediction, and add another kind of roadblock in terms of me doing this prediction, because even though when you look at a lot of these teams coming into this season, they might not have a very decent squad. Well, if they are able to add some players and make some decent signing in the summer transfer window, they could look like a complete different team in the second half of this season. Like I know one specific team could come to mind immediately of taking advantage of that, and that of course is the Seattle Sounders, where years after year they've been able to make some good signing in the summer transfer window, and then they just went on a crazy second half resurgence. Now, we haven't seen that always play out to be the case place in MLS, but that's just something that I want to kind of mention because that does make it a little bit harder for me to kind of make these prediction if I was thinking about how if these teams that I'm predicting that's going to miss the playoffs and they make some big signings in the summer to improve their squad, they could potentially end up here on the left side of the table and potentially do make it to the playoffs. Now, moving on to number 6, and I'm going to say it's going to be Toronto FC. So for TFC, again, I feel like they are definitely going to hit a set. They're going to suffer a bit of a setback this season, and it's not just because I don't really trust the fact that this core is kind of aging a little bit badly, and I don't know whether or not if they can continue to produce the goals that needs to of course win games, because we saw last season, especially down the stretch, this team just could not score goals, and that's even with the reigning MVP Alejandro Pozuelo in their team. They were still struggling to trying to score goals and just barely scraping game by winning 1-0. But the other big issue for this TFC side is they have no depth. Like, this is really a team that I feel like if they better pray that throughout the entire season they do not suffer some back-breaking injuries, because if they do, then yeah, this team probably is not going to do very well, because again, when you look at their depth chart, it's a lot of kids that is coming out of this TFC academy, and there's a lot of unknown in terms of that. And when they do get to that point, this is definitely a team that looks nowhere near to be kind of like an MLS Cup contender team from previous season. And also because of the fact that this is a congested schedule and we're still in a COVID pandemic, it's definitely not an ideal situation for you to be heading into this season and basically have no depth, and you better hope that none of these star player on your core is going to suffer a back-breaking injury. Now, that being said, as I mentioned about the summer transfer window, maybe in the summer they might grab some depth signing in terms of adding a much-needed depth into this team. But if they don't do that, I just don't see how they're going to be finished very well on the table. Especially, I feel like they are going to suffer some injury, and especially there are a couple of players on this team that does have history of injuries for the past couple of seasons. I'm looking at you, Josie Altidore, with the way that his hamstring is literally made out of mac and cheese with the way that this past couple of seasons has gone. Now, moving on to 5th place, and now we're getting to the part of the table where I think right around here, this is where it's going to get very close. I think these teams between 2nd and 5th place can really move around throughout the standings, and that they're kind of also very similar in terms of quality wise, and that again they could, just because I might predict a team that's going to finish 5th, don't be surprised by the end of the season they could jump as high as 2nd place, or even maybe be challenged the top team in the Eastern Conference. And one of those teams is the New England Revolution. So for New England, we know that they definitely have depth, and they have added those depth in this off season, along with the main core that of course is starting to show that this could be an MLS Cup contender. So why exactly still I put them in 5th place and this low in the table? Well, there is that uncertainty of whether or not if guys like Adam Buxa and Gustavo Bol will score the goal, and that I'm pretty sure they cannot have another season where their main top goal scorer is going to be Teal Bunbury. Like, this is no disrespect to Teal Bunbury. I think he's a very decent player, but he's kind of more like a good, decent backup kind of option. Not a guy that you really want to heavily rely on scoring, being your top goal scorer, and a guy that's going to bang in double-digit goal. But another thing that I think is a little bit concerned for the Revs, and this is something that I should not mention before, but it's the set-piece defending. Like, this team last season was one of the worst teams in terms of set-piece defending, and they conceded some of the most goals ever by any MLS team on the set-piece. I think only the Quakes had a worse set-piece defensive record than New England has last season. So if they don't fix that woes heading into this upcoming season, yeah, that could definitely be a bit of a setback for them. And not to mention also they need to figure out that weird situation where last season they just could not win at home. I mean, I'm assuming that's going to probably fix because now there's going to be fans in the stands at Gillette Stadium. I'm assuming they're not going to struggle as much at home as they are last season. But the set piece defending, that is something that is still going to be a bit of a concern alongside with those two number 9 going up top, and whether or not if they can be a regular goal scorer for this team. Now at number 4, I'm gonna say it's gonna be the Philadelphia Union. So again, for the Union, I feel like this might be another season where they're going to suffer for a setback, and I know I said that last season, and look what happened. They end up winning the Supporters' Shield, so watch how probably at the end of the season they're going to once again win the Supporters' Shield, or better yet, they potentially are going to win the MLS Cup. And in some way, I think that's kind of what they plan for this season, where they know that, they're probably not going to win the Supporters' Shield again, but that's not the goal for this team. The goal for this team is that they want to try to redeem themselves what happened last time in the playoffs, where they suffer an early playoff exit, and they believe that they will have the core to able to go into the playoffs and go much deeper into the playoffs, or even winning MLS Cup this season. Now that of course is something that they're going to have to do without two of their best player that was a big part of that Supporters' Shield winning side in Brendan Aronson and Mark McKenzie. But knowing the fact that they did make some off-season signings to try to at least kind of put a placeholder for them to try to maybe replace Brendan Aronson, and especially, I talk about how this Union team has the best academy in the league. I trust the fact that there's going to be somebody in that Union academy that's going to break out into this team, and that even though we probably don't know who they are, by the end of the season, we know this specific player is another player that come out of this brilliant Union academy that this team has, and he's probably going to be a guy that I won't be surprised could be sold off to Europe, and the Union could get a big sum of money to cash in heading into next off season. But now moving on into the top 3, and in third place I am going to say Atlanta United. So for Atlanta, I expect, with all the signings that they made this off season, it's definitely great to see that they're trying to make all these off-season signings to try to be a competitive team, and also knowing the fact that Joseph Martinez is back to this team, I'm assuming he's going to be back to his old self, and maybe even be better and more hungry to score goals. But I have a feeling maybe Atlanta might be struggling out of the gate, because when you have a squad that they have, which had a lot of new pieces, it's going to take time to gel together. And not only need to mention Gabriel Heinze, who is going to come into the squad and trying to for the first couple of weeks to try to mesh the squad together to look like a team that not only could be a playoff contender and an MLS Cup contender. They're probably going to. That is probably the reason why they're going to probably struggle early on. But once this team does get going, once all those players that they brought this offseason turns out to be a hit and started to get rolling, and also Joseph Martinez looked like the old Joseph of himself, yeah, this team is easily a top 3 team, maybe even a top 2 team. And speaking of top 2, now I know Atlanta fans are going to be mad that I am going to put Orlando City above them, but I truly believe that, if Atlanta can beat Orlando City, which they're going to meet them 3 times this season, if they can maybe win all 3 of their meeting, then there could be a case that Atlanta could actually finish above Orlando. But the reason why I still put Orlando over Atlanta is because at least we know that they do have the core in place, and they could definitely have a core that could do well throughout the entire part of the season. Now I know they did lose a big piece this offseason in Daryl DK, who he might come back to this team once the season ends in the championship with Barnsley, but knowing the fact that he is literally lighting up the championship and his transfer value is continue to rise, I won't be surprised that if he does come back to Orlando City, he's probably going to only stay there for like 5 to 6 weeks before there's going to be a big club in Europe that's going to ask to get Daryl DK away from Orlando City during the summer transfer window. Now, despite that, they do have have kind of a player that could potentially replace him, and that of course is Alexander Pato. And Pato, I know some people will say that he could end up to be like the Chicharito and Higuain of the league, because of the fact that he has definitely not been the prime Pato as we've seen in the past years. And also there's that injury concern with him having a lot of injury concern throughout his career. But one thing that I will say that is different between Pato being in Orlando City and the situation that he's in with Orlando City is different than what with Gonzalo Higuain and Chicharito is with the Galaxy and Higuain with Inter Miami too. Because unlike when Higuain and Chicharito are with that team and they're asked to be their main goal scorer and the guy that is going to really carry the team on the offense, Pato doesn't really need to do so. Like this Orlando City team, even without DK, has a very good attacking in core, and I just think with that being said, with Pato coming into the team that already had established himself to have a very good attacking core, that could maybe put some pressure off him that he needs to be the guy to really perform, and he needs to be the guy that fills the shoes of Daryl DK and scored the goals for this team. So yeah, that is kind of the reason why I feel like maybe in that situation Pato could be much more successful with less pressure for him to score goals compared to what Chicharito and Higuain had to do, where they really need to be the guy that scored the goals, or else things are not going to go well and they would consider a flop in the league. But now, in first place, in my prediction, well, you probably already know it, who I'm going to put in first place, and that, of course, is the Columbus Crew. Now, I know I can, of course, talk about how they are probably, no doubt, the best team in the league right now heading into this upcoming season, and they're probably going to be favorites of winning MLS Cup this season and also favorites of winning Supporters Shield. There is kind of starting to maybe be a little bit concerned, especially looking at the depth that they have in this team. Well, actually, let me rephrase it. There's not a lot of concern about the depth that they have in this team, because this team has just some insane depth with this team, with pretty much almost every position at least being 2 deep, with some even being 3 or 4 deep. But there are concerned the fact that there are some of these players in the depth chart that have suffered injury. Recently today, I've just heard Kevin Molino suffer an injury that's going to keep him out 6 to 8 weeks, and it's definitely a shame to see that Molino, unfortunately, is kind of go back to what he's always been throughout his career, which is a guy that have had tons of injury issue. And although this might not actually be something that might be backbreaker for Columbus, knowing the fact that they still have some star player in Luis Diaz and Santos being there, but let's say if both of those players might get injured throughout the season, and at least we know that there's a question of whether or not if Pedro Santo is actually okay after we saw him suffer an injury in that game against Real Esteli. So let's say if they don't have those star player, and now they also don't have Kevin Molino as the guy that was supposed to replace them, then where do you go after that? I mean, you can only suffer for a lot of injury before you realize that these injuries are eventually going to take a toll. And even with how deep this Columbus team is, if they're going to continue to suffer some back-breaking injury like they kind of did with last season, yeah, it could eventually get to a toll where they might slow down a little bit. Now, that being said, maybe this is just something that is kind of unfortunate for them, and maybe they might go injury-free throughout the season. And also, I did also mention in the expectation index, just because they look like they are a very deep team, a lot of these players that is in the second or third of the depth chart, it will be interesting to see if they do have to come in to replace some of those injured player that are regular starters for this team, whether or not if they can have the same quality. Again, the injury issue, and that they do become one of those unlucky team that has a ton of injury to deal with. Even the most deepest team probably is going to have trouble in terms of that. And also, I haven't even brought up the issue that they had on the road last season, which I'm assuming this season they're going to be better on the road. Like, there's no way in the world they're going to go another season where they did not win a single game on the road. And a lot of the problem on the road last season was due to the fact that they were playing a squad that was really depleted, and now that this off season they of course added to those quality and load up the depth chart. maybe they're not going to have that same issue as they had on the road as they did last season. But yeah, there you have it. That is pretty much it for my prediction of the Eastern Conference table. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of this video, and as always, if you disagree with where I put your team in this table, if you think that I put them too low or even on the right side of the table, which these are the team that I don't expect to make the playoffs, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button. Tomorrow, of course, I will be doing the Western Conference table and look at the prediction of that. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.